All right, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Amish Rebel podcast. Greatly appreciate you guys watching and sharing this video, and we appreciate your support on the platform. Today we have a very special guest on. His name is Roy Troyer. I'll let him explain a little bit the relationship between me and him, and I'm super excited to get into today's conversation. We're going to be talking about a little bit of his story, his background, his relationship between him and I, and then also we would love to be able to get to the conversation between Christianity and the Amish religion and that relationship, because a lot of you have been asking what's the difference between a Christian and an Amish person? Are they all Christians? And so we'd love to be able to get to that conversation. So thank you for tuning in. With that being said, if you wouldn't mind, Roy, just sharing a little bit with the audience of how you grew up and, I guess what that was like within your home.
So to your question about my relationship to you, I am your brother-in-law.
Yeah. I'm thankful that you're my brother-in-law, yeah.
He is married to my sister. So, yeah, that's the relationship between us. I grew up in Berlin, Ohio, a little bit south of Berlin, which is in Holmes County, Ohio, and we are sometimes the biggest and sometimes the second biggest Amish community in the world. I think it kind of goes back and forth between Lancaster and, in PA, and then Holmes County, Ohio. Some people say one way, some people say another way, but anyway, we're one of the biggest Amish communities in the world. That's where I grew up. I grew up Old Order Amish, which is slightly different than how Enos grew up, which he grew up Swartzen Trooper Amish.
Yeah.
Right? So,
yes.
Yeah, so my experience would have been a little bit different than Enos's, although sometimes I say that the way our family specifically grew up was almost Swartzen Trooper.
Yeah. Because you guys had connections, like, to go into kind of the different denominations within the Amish. You would have, like, your mom came out of what they call Dan Church.
Right. Which is about a step above Swartzen Trooper. They would be just a hair more liberal than the Swartzen Trooper Amish.
Gotcha.
And her mom would have actually come from, or was it, I think her mom would have come from either a Swartzen Trooper background or something very similar. There's some offshoots that are very similarly conservative to Swords and Troopers. So on that side of my family, I have cousins to this day that are Danners, is what we would call them.
Yeah.
Very strict, more conservative than the Old Order Amish. So the thing with the Old Order is we actually, I say we, I haven't been Old Order Amish in 21 years, but my background, the Old Order Amish, they progress a little more. Like their rules keep evolving quite a bit, whereas the Swartzen Trooper Amish would have set a date, and it hasn't changed since then, right?
Yeah, pretty well. I mean, they stick with the set of rules that they're. I mean, I don't remember our rules ever changing in our community, and to this day that's the way they are. I mean, that's just they progress. If they progress too much, then there's a split in the church. And like I've mentioned in previous videos, that would just mean like one church progresses and the other one stays with the original rules.
Right.
The
original rules one would still be the Swartzen Troopers.
Yeah,
and the others would call themselves something different. Usually,
yep,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so Old Order, I would have, like I said, it's been about 21 years since I've been with the Amish. I never joined the Amish church, but back then the Old Order Amish were still very strict, especially where I grew up. Very conservative. Nowadays some Amish people have solar panels. The Old Order Amish have solar panels, and they have light switches in their houses. As long as it's off the grid, it's acceptable. They still have their horses and buggies. They still dress Amish for the most part. Some of them buy clothes at the store now, which is not something that would have happened quite as much when I was younger. No, we would have grown up in a very conservative, very strict part of the Old Order Amish church. At 16, I quit going to church because I was a rebel. Started partying, got into a lot of things I shouldn't have.
So at 16, was that it? Is that because in Swartz and Trooper it's like 16 and a half? I don't know where they get the half from, but that's like when you become a part of the youth. So at 16, you would have been a part of the youth?
It's a little complicated with the Old Order. We're not as cohesive as the Swartz and Trooper are, and what I mean by that is there's splits in the way that the youth operate.
Okay.
You have your party group, you have the singing group, which it was actually just those two groups back when I was younger.
Okay.
But then later what we have now is what's developed as some middle group that doesn't really party, and they're not also the ultra-religious people that are going to singings every Sunday. And basically they just wanted to get away from the partying. Like the Old Order Amish and even, the Swartz and Trooper Amish have this reputation of rumspringa.
Yeah.
They sow their wild oats and, go out and have a wild time, which that's been the stereotype, and that's been very true for the most part, although, like I said, among the Old Order, there was always a faction that had their singing crowd. And what that means is going to singings in the evenings after a church service was at somebody's place.
Gotcha. So it's almost like a youth group for the Amish in a modern term.
Right.
So it'd be like their youth group.
Right. So I would have, my family, I think most of them would have gone to the singing crowd.
Okay.
Because there was a lot of pressure from my mom.
Okay.
And also I think some of my oldest siblings were probably convicted that way, and they naturally kind of went that way and kind of set a precedent for us.
Okay.
And some of the younger ones I don't think really embraced it, but I think most of them went, except down to the last few of us. But none of them really partied. I was the one who broke that mold.
I see a correlation here. You were the second, the youngest. I was
the youngest.
Oh yeah, you were the youngest.
Your wife is
my wife is the second, the youngest. How could I forget that? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I was extremely rebellious. I'll just put that out there.
Yeah.
I was bitter at the way I grew up.
What do you think that was? Do you think it was? I mean, I've shared on here, like, I think a lot of that it came from all the rules. Like, I was just really upset at, like, how strong the rules are, and they don't have, like, answers for them. You think it was something similar for you? Or
Not
was
really.
it just...
I mean, the rules didn't really make sense to me after some time, but it's not why I really turned against the Amish. I would just say that I didn't fit into the culture.
Oh, gotcha.
I didn't fit into the culture. I had a bad time in school. Fitting in, didn't fit in, and was treated very poorly in school, to be honest with you. And I just feel like our family in general didn't really fit into the
Yeah, they don't.
We didn't fit the mold.
Yeah.
And so...
And there's definitely something to that. I've shared that before. Like, there's something to being in the Amish community. There's some families that just, it's almost like they're meant to be Amish.
Right.
Like they're
the ones that set the standard, basically.
Yeah.
And you have that in society. You have some people that are popular and they set the standard, and they're the people that move the needle and make things happen or not happen, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. So you didn't feel like you fit in, and that caused you to want to, like, get out of the community?
Right. I started partying, and I didn't do it. Actually, I didn't even go with the Amish youth to party. I stayed. At first, I did a little bit. That's how I got my feet wet. But I even wanted to get away from that. I wanted nothing to do with the Amish anymore. I went and partied with people who weren't Amish for the most part. Now, there were ex-Amish people involved, but the crowd in general was more of a hardcore, like, drug party crowd.
Gotcha.
Which involved, high school students, people who had no Amish background.
Gotcha.
So it was, I hate to put it this way, but kind of my middle finger to the Amish.
Yeah. Yeah. But that has changed for you big time.
Absolutely.
I mean,
I went from being a very rebellious person to I repented from my sins. I received the Lord. The Lord received me. He found me in my sins. And
what do you mean by the Lord? You received the Lord, and the Lord received you. Like, expand on that a little bit, because I think that means a lot of different things for a lot of different people.
Well, basically, I don't know exactly where the scripture is. It's in the Gospels, but Jesus has the, what do you want to call it, a parable, but talking about the lost sheep.
Yeah.
And he goes after the one that strayed.
Mm-hmm.
I was that lost sheep, and he found me, basically.
Okay.
After he found me, I allowed him to save me, I guess. You can refuse him if you harden your heart. But I actually didn't party that hard for that long. I think it was like 3 years, and I got burned out. I partied really hard. And I just started reflecting on some choices I made, and it was obviously the Lord moving in my heart.
Yeah.
And he softened my heart. I started being a little more open to, there were certain people that came into my life that spoke about faith, even in the party crowd, which I was like, most of the people I was partying with never talk about the Lord. Yeah. But this happened, and I was like, this is almost a foreign language to me now. But it planted a seed, even though I kind of felt like you're living a double life,
Yeah.
But it planted a seed, and I think the Lord used that to start thinking about faith again. And essentially, there was one night that I was partying really hard. I think I was on LSD, I was on ecstasy, I was on marijuana, I was on alcohol. And then the next day,
this Amish guy was really going wild.
Yeah, I was a rebel.
Wow.
Next day I got up and did it all over again. Took like 2 hits of acid, which is LSD for those of you who aren't familiar with the terminology. And so after I did that, I was not in a good place. And
I bet you weren't.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I didn't even know this. Like I knew that you had your past and that you partied really hard, but I didn't know this about you.
Yeah, I was doing some really hard drugs. And so I was in a bad state the next day. Like, if these are psychedelic drugs, which put you in a different dimension, kind of. Are you familiar with psychedelic drugs?
No.
So ecstasy is, what is the scientific term for it? Like Molly would be a version of it, kind of. I forget what the technical scientific term is for it. Most people who have any familiarity with drugs are going to know what ecstasy is.
Yeah.
And then LSD, they're both psychedelic drugs, and they kind of put you in a different spiritual dimension, not in a good way.
Gotcha.
So, I was not in a good place, and somebody drove me home the next day, and the whole way home, I was just thinking, this has got to end. So, it was kind of a sudden decision, actually. I feel like it was kind of sudden, and I was maybe a little more that way back then. So I went home, and I prayed to God for the first time in a long time, and that was actually the very last time I ever did drugs.
Wow. That's crazy.
Now, I fell back into drinking sometimes later, but as far as narcotics, that was the very last time I did.
Wow.
Narcotics.
How old were you at that point?
19.
So what would you say to a 16-year-old that's wanting to go down that path? He thinks it's a good idea.
Don't do it.
Don't do it.
When I was 16, we were very much inculcated in religion. You have to understand. Like, I heard all the stories of people who got into partying, got into drugs, and later gave their lives to the Lord and were set free. And, in the back of my mind, I was like, well, I could kind of have a story like that. I didn't know for sure, do I want to ever be a Christian again? But I was like, I can play the game and the Lord can deliver me later. It's not exactly, it is that way, but it's not exactly that way. Gotcha. You still have to deal with the consequences. And sometimes the Lord knows if you're playing games. He knows what your intentions are. And I think me being a little more intentional with my rebellion and thinking kind of the Lord can take care of it later. Well, he walked me through some deep, dark things after I returned to him to unravel a lot of that stuff.
Wow.
There's a lot that somebody who gets into that kind of stuff has to deal with in the spiritual realm that people who don't get into that don't have to deal with. So essentially, I'm telling you, your life will be easier if you never get into drugs, especially on the psychedelic end. The psychedelic drugs, you're inviting demonic activity into your life, essentially. You're opening a door that later you will have to close in a spiritual way with the Lord. So.
Yeah. And the other thing that plays into that is like you're playing with fire, right? Yeah. I mean, the amount of times that you were saved from not,
right, from harm, from overdose, whatever the case might be. Yeah.
From not losing your life, so to speak,
right.
like completely.
Exactly.
It's
totally the mercy of the Lord.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, I think that's the other factor is you go down that road, at least for myself, like I went down that road just strictly out of rebellion against the rules. Mm-hmm. And even though I sort of knew better, like I still wanted to rebel against the rules.
Right.
Against all the Amish rules to kind of, in your words, like give them the middle finger and just, show them that I can do whatever I want, basically. And yeah, there's countless of times where I know that I was saved from not being my life was spared, I guess.
Right. And I discovered the foolishness of destroying your own life to get back at other people. If you really stop and think about it, it's one of the silliest things in the world. It makes absolutely no sense. Destroy your mind, destroy your body, destroy your soul, all for what? Because you want to get back at somebody. Yeah. It makes no sense. The Lord had to open my eyes to that. You can't think of that on your own, if you're in that state of mind, obviously. So. Yeah.
It's a lot like what we see with unforgiveness, right? You hold a grudge against a person. In unforgiveness, it's like, I mean, people have said it in the past, it's like drinking poison expecting the other person to die.
And that's what it was for me. It was unforgiveness. Yeah. I was bitter. I wanted to get back at them by living a completely different lifestyle than what they might approve of.
Yeah. So you were able to, at what point did you and I meet? Because
Actually, you and I would have met shortly after I would have gotten out of my party phase, I think.
So how old are you now?
I am 36. We'll be 37 in a few.
So you're a year older than I am. I'm 35 currently. At the time of this recording, I'm 35.
Okay, I'm 36, but I'm a couple weeks from 37.
Okay, so you're a year older. But so we would have met. I mean, I pretty much completely changed my life around at 19. So we would have met like 2 years after you had changed your life around. Probably.
Something like that.
Yeah,
I would have probably been 20 or 21 when we met. Yeah.
So, I remember hearing all the stories of how bad you were. I just never heard the details. I never heard the details.
Was my sister telling you all these stories?
Yeah. I mean, you're on a good road of recovery by the time I met you. So. And then, of course, my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, you and him hung out some. Dan Slava.
Oh, yeah. We had a background together. Yeah. He was very crazy, too. We'll leave that at that, I guess.
Yeah, we'll allow him to share his story one day, or give him the opportunity. Dan has an incredible story. I would love for him to be able to share his story sometime. But I also want to get into, before we move on, I want to just point out the fact that Roy has written a few books, right?
A couple.
And I want you to share with the audience how they can access those books, because I think they're great, or at least this little bit that I've read from them, I love reading them, and you're a great writer, so I would love for the audience to be able to access your work. And so if you want to go ahead and let them know where they could find that, and then we'll move on to talking about the Amish religion versus Christianity. So.
Yeah, so my book, the most obvious place is Amazon. That's where everybody,
okay.
Not everybody, but most people buy books. It's on Amazon, or both of them are on Amazon. Actually available through Audible, so you can listen to it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
okay.
It's on Audible. It's called Forged Destiny. Is the
Forged?
Main, yes, Forged Destiny.
Okay. All
is
right.
the main book. I wrote a prequel after that to kind of have a free copy to give away to people, to kind of introduce them to my work.
Okay.
But the main book is Forged Destiny.
Okay.
And it's an allegory, maybe something similar to Pilgrim's Progress was kind of my inspiration, but it's the allegory genre.
Okay.
But it's available in pretty much all digital bookstores as well. Smashwords is one that comes to mind, Barnes and Nobles.
So if
I can't think of all of them, but I have it on a hub that publishes it out to all the different distributors. So essentially, whatever digital book platform you use to buy books, it's probably going to be on there.
Okay.
But on Amazon, and I think on Barnes and Nobles as well, you can buy the paperback copy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is it a if people search your name, Roy Troyer, can they find it, or how do they find it?
I think you can find it on Amazon by putting my name in, or even on the search engines with the other booksellers.
Otherwise, you just put the
a,
name of the book in there?
Or you can search the name of the book, which is
Okay.
Forged Destiny.
Do you have a website that people can go to?
I do.
Okay.
Which my website would only have a link to Amazon, I think.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, as long as people can... You got to make it simple for us simple folks. I don't know if I can remember the name of the book, but I can remember your name. So
so my website is simply my name, roytroyer.com.
Okay.
Yep.
And then
And then there's a tab on there for books, and there's going to be a link in there to go to Amazon.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So please check that out, and if it's of any interest, I'm sure he'd appreciate it if you buy a copy. He wasn't expecting that, but
I was not.
I love to help people out in any way that I can, especially if you're doing that kind of work. So now the question that everybody's probably been waiting for is Christianity versus the Amish religion, from like your experience growing up Amish, and then would you consider yourself a Christian now?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
So give me a little bit of clarity on what you think a Christian, or who do you think is a Christian or falls into that category?
Well, that's kind of a dicey question, because that's kind of up for interpretation for a lot of people. Look at it a little bit differently, because in every sect, whether it's whether you have a different religion or even denominations within, say, the Christian religion, you have people who you might consider nominal Christians or nominal Muslims or nominal Jews, whatever the case might be. And that would essentially mean kind of in name only. And that means they practice to some level, but they're not very serious about it.
Gotcha.
It's a heritage, it's a tradition, it's whatever. So if you look at it that way, there's like, what is it, 2 billion or is it 1 billion? I forget what the stat is. Christians in the world who call themselves Christians.
Okay.
And it's hard to, look at somebody and say, and if they say they're a Christian, to tell them, no, you're not. But I think there's still this element of you have nominal Christians and you have people who are more serious about their faith.
Okay. Would that be considered a disciple? Is there a difference? Would you consider a Christian? Is there like a difference between a Christian and a disciple? Is that what kind of separates someone that's...
I guess you could say that. A disciple is someone who is willing to be formed and shaped and molded by the Lord and to follow what he says.
Okay.
And to not just have it be a tradition or a culture, whatever you might want to call it.
Yeah.
A surface level, whatever, But as far as the Amish versus Christianity, I would say some people might argue with me. Some people call the Amish a cult. And maybe some sections of the Amish are.
I think the Storchentrooper definitely. They're more cultish-like.
You could make that argument.
Yeah.
But technically, they have traditionally been another denomination of the Christian religion. Okay. And I think where some of that shifted is when technology came on the scene and they started withdrawing themselves from society a little bit.
Gotcha.
Before, say, around World War II, the Amish were very much mingling with the rest of Christendom.
Okay.
There was not that much difference between the Amish and other Christians.
Gotcha.
But the thing is, the Amish people have Swiss heritage. They have Swiss blood, and they're not very prone, or they don't like change, very traditional, which Swiss people, if you look, they're kind of that way too. So they kind of put the brakes on when technology came on the scene, and they kind of separated themselves, and for that reason, some people call them a cult. Because even when I was growing up, the Old Order Amish had some ways that you could call cultish in the way that they kept people in the faith.
Yeah.
And even now, there are some parts of the Old Order Church that use these strategies to coerce people to stay in the faith.
What would one strategy be that you could think of?
Well, you can take both sides of it. One side would be bribery, tempt them to become Amish by saying, here's the home farm. If you stay Amish, this is yours at a very discounted price.
Yeah.
I know someone personally who had that, he ended up, anyway. But I know of that, and it still happens among the Old Order Amish. And then there's the other side of it, where they use fear tactics. And that doesn't happen very much anymore, or not as much as it used to. It used to be when I was really young that the Old Order Amish still had this mentality that if you leave the Amish, you're probably going to hell.
Yeah.
And they would use that against their children to keep them in the faith.
Yeah.
In their faith or cult, whatever you want to call it. Back then it kind of was that way.
Yeah.
And, and then if you would leave, I know that some would have maybe hung on to their social security card or their birth certificate or do whatever they can to just make their life hard. Now, I say that was back then, and that was only a certain section. Okay, so I'll bring this into play. My wife also grew up Old Order Amish.
Okay.
She would have grown up about 7 miles north of where I grew up.
Okay.
I tell her some of the things that I grew up with, and it's completely foreign to her. So, even back then, there were different parts of the Old Order Amish that were not that way.
Gotcha.
They were more open, more supportive of people if they might leave. Not necessarily, they always encourage you to stay Amish. Because of family ties, they feel like they can be closer.
Yeah.
More in common. It's just, they want you to be Amish. But I guess they never used those kinds of strategies or tactics in her circles. But where I'm from, a little further south, it was a little different back when I was growing up. But even that has changed tremendously over the years. Go ahead.
So that would be for the old order. The Swartzen troopers still use all those tactics.
Right.
I mean,
I get that.
Yeah. So.
And I can relate to some of that because when I was young, I saw those same tactics among the old order that I knew.
Gotcha.
But, I mean, it is changed. I can't even believe how much it's changed in the last 20, 25 years among the old order Amish in our area.
Yeah. I was blown away when I first left. That was one of the things that kind of gave me a little different perspective of the Amish as a whole, because when you leave, you think like, or at least for me, when I left, even though I left from a Swartzen Trooper community, I just thought like most Amish are going to be this way. Mm-hmm. But then I came to Ohio. I lived in Ohio for a while. No longer live here, but I lived in Ohio for a while, and I realized that. I began working for an older Amish guy, and it was like so different from the way I grew up. He treated me with respect. He took care of me like I was his son, even though I was working for him. And that just like gave me a different outlook of Amish people, and I began like respecting Amish people again.
Right. And you're always going to have the ultra orthodox, if you will,
yeah,
that still hold the line,
yeah.
And are not going to be quite as much that way.
Yeah.
But my wife, after we got married, I preferred to just completely stay away from the Amish. Like that was my strategy. Even after I was born again, I still had a chip on my shoulder. Like I was just going to stay away from the Amish. I was just going to do my own thing, not go to their functions, not go to their weddings, church services, whatever.
Yeah.
I married my wife, and she had none of these experiences, and she kept dragging me to these weddings and all these functions, and finally I came around and saw that there is a different side to the Amish,
and there's a lot to appreciate,
right?
Like that I've noticed too is if there's especially within the older community. I could never really see myself like interacting much with the Swartzen Trooper community anymore. There are some families that are very welcoming, like in the Swartzen Trooper community, but they mostly like fall right back into that almost like turning against you when other families come around because they're peer pressure. Yeah. Right. And so I could, for that reason, I couldn't see myself like interacting much with the Swartzen Trooper community. But older is like I enjoy it. I really, I mean,
I've come to appreciate a lot about the way I grew up, even, and the Amish culture, especially as the world spins out of control with things in the complete opposite direction of the conservative lifestyle that I grew up in. I really appreciate the community because I still live here. I live right here in Holmes County, actually right next door to where I grew up. So I'm in the heart of the Amish country here. I work with Amish people every day, interact with them every day, and I've come to appreciate them very much. I've set aside my grievances, and
I
think we've both kind of walked in each other's direction. Let's put it that way. The Amish have moved quite a bit towards the more tolerant side, and I have moved more into embracing, what they stand for, I guess, as a culture and so on.
Yeah, and I think that for the audience, I've mentioned it in several other videos that if you're looking to interact with an Amish community, like the older Amish community is probably the more welcoming Amish community out there. Like
even the New Order, which at one time would have been considered more liberal or whatever, they hold the line more now than like they made their thing, and now that's where they are. Like they hold the line there now. And I know shouldn't get into too many Amish sects here because there are a lot. I could confuse the audience here, but for me, having grown up Old Order and seeing the New Order, like it seems ironic to many people that the Old Order are definitely more welcoming now than almost any other subgroup of the Amish, which the Old Order by and large are the main group of Amish people. Like that's probably why they're called the Old Order, I guess. But
yeah. So I just want to ask the question specifically: are all Amish considered Christians?
They would consider themselves Christians, I'm sure. I think the question that most people that leave the Amish develop is how many of them are sincere in their faith and how many of them are following their tradition. Because the big thing, or it used to be the big thing when I was younger, is like the Amish wouldn't preach being born again. And that was kind of the dividing line. People would leave the Amish because they're born again and they're not necessarily welcome in the Amish community anymore because they're placing more emphasis on their relationship with the Lord and following Him and being a disciple of His rather than following the mold of the church and the traditions, which that's kind of the snare that the Amish culture kind of has offered traditionally. Following the church and the bishop more than focusing on serving the Lord. And some of that's changed quite a bit. I think I got sidetracked a little bit. When I started going to some of these places with my wife, like weddings and stuff like that, I noticed the preaching was different than what I was used to when I was younger. And they actually started preaching the gospel and being born again and saying things like, these clothes aren't going to save you, our rules aren't going to save you. That's huge.
I remember the first time I heard that, I'm like, wow, that's a pretty big statement for an Amish person to say that.
And that might seem, pretty crazy to an outsider that they would even consider that. They would find their salvation in the clothes they wear. But the thing is, at one time, that was really very much what they got hung up on was their traditions and their way of life and just basically doing it the way that their fathers did it. And it's ironic because when the Amish first, or I should say the Anabaptists, because at first they were all one group called the Anabaptists, when they split off of the church state in Switzerland, like they were the ones going against the establishment and they were going out and actually living for the Lord and being disciples and living in a holy way, because among the Amish, traditionally, not as much anymore, there was a lot of room for licentious living. Even though you're following the rules, you might have, how would I put this? I guess usually it was secret stuff kind of, I guess. But still, it was kind of winked at, just stuff that people might kind of know, but they just wink at it because you're following the rules. But that's changing quite a bit too. So there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of nuances to the Amish history and, and the way it all has evolved. But
And that's why I love getting the different perspectives. And I just want to thank you we're coming to a close here on today's episode as well, but I just want to thank you for taking the time to come on today.
Absolutely.
And to talk about this and give the audience a kind of a different perspective within the Amish as a whole. I grew up Schwarzentrooper, so we talk mostly from, my experiences. My niece Lavina's experiences growing up Schwarzentrooper, and a lot of the people that I've interviewed so far were Schwarzentrooper Amish, and so I think it's great that we get a perspective from the Old Order Amish as well. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you got some value out of this and you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. Share it with your friends. We've been growing the podcast tremendously, and I know it's because of you guys. And so thank you for participating in that. And with that, remember, be intentional. We'll see you in the next episode.